Hey, stop scrolling for a second. Because what I'm about to tell you actually happened in a mansion outside Charleston, South Carolina. And it involves a woman in a silk red dress, a bowl of ice water, and a maid who never raised her voice once. Everyone who worked in that house was scared of her. Scared of her tone, her stare, the way she said, "You're dismissed," like she was swatting a fly. Maids came and went. Some cried in the pantry. Some quit before their first paycheck. But there was one woman, one quiet, steady woman, who didn't run. And what she did instead didn't just change her own life. It changed the woman who tried to break her. Stay with me, because this story doesn't end the way you think it will. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we get into today's story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? Which country, which city? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one of them. Tonight's story is one about dignity. About the quiet kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't beg, doesn't break. It just waits. It's about a woman who lost almost everything and still found a way to hold her head high in a house that tried to make her feel small. I'm not going to tell you how it ends. I'm not even going to tell you what happens halfway through. All I'll say is this. By the end of this story, you might look at the people who serve you coffee, clean your office, or carry your bags a little differently. Let's begin. Nobody warned Amara Whitfield about Bianca Sterling. Nobody had to. The moment she stepped into the marble foyer of the Sterling estate for her first day, she felt it. That particular chill that comes from a house where the air itself seems to know who's in charge. Amara was 34 years old, a single mother from a small town 2 hours outside Charleston, and she needed this job more than she'd ever needed anything in her life. Her son, Malik, was 7, and 3 months earlier, Amara's ex-husband had stopped sending child support altogether. The rent on their small apartment was 2 months behind. The refrigerator held half a carton of eggs and a jar of grape jelly. When the staffing agency called and said the Sterling estate needed a live-in housekeeper, room, board, and $1,100 a week, Amara had cried on the phone from relief. She didn't know yet what the job would cost her. Bianca Sterling was 28, engaged to Charles Sterling, a real estate billionaire twice her age, and she ran that house like a queen running a kingdom that despised her. The staff called her Miss Bianca to her face and other things behind her back. She'd fired 3 housekeepers in 4 months. 1 for folding towels the wrong way. 1 for using the wrong brand of glass cleaner on the piano room windows. 1, the story went, for simply looking at her the wrong way during breakfast. Amara heard all of this from Rosa, the cook, on her very first morning, as they stood in the kitchen at 5:30 a.m. preparing coffee that had to be exactly 192 degrees. No more, no less, because Miss Bianca had a thermometer and she used it. "Keep your eyes down," Rosa whispered. "Keep your voice soft. Never explain yourself. She hates when we explain ourselves. She says it sounds like we're arguing." Amara nodded, gripping the coffee pot with both hands so they wouldn't shake. She met Bianca for the first time at 6 a.m. in the grand dining room, beneath a chandelier that probably cost more than Amara's car. Bianca sat at the head of the table in a white silk robe, scrolling through her phone, not even looking up. "You're the new one," Bianca said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Amara. I don't care about your name yet. Names are for people who last." Bianca finally looked up, and Amara felt herself being measured, assessed, weighed, and quietly dismissed, all in the space of 2 seconds. "Coffee's cold." It wasn't cold. Amara had checked the thermometer herself. But she said nothing. She simply turned, walked back to the kitchen, and made a fresh pot, her hands trembling only once she was out of sight. That was the first day. It was, in many ways, the easiest one. Over the following weeks, Amara learned the unwritten rules of the house. Never speak unless spoken to. Never make eye contact during meals. Never let your shadow fall across Bianca's plate. Fold the hand towels into thirds, not halves. Iron the pillowcases. Yes, the pillowcases, until they held a crease sharp enough to cut paper. She learned, too, that Bianca reserved a special kind of cruelty for the staff who were kind to each other. When she caught Amara and Rosa laughing quietly in the kitchen one evening, sharing a private joke about a cooking show, Bianca appeared in the doorway like a shadow falling across warm light. "This isn't a social club," she said. "You're not friends. You're employees. Act like it." Amara went back to her room that night, a small plain space above the garage, and sat on the edge of her bed, taking out her phone to look at a photo of Malik grinning gap-toothed at his last birthday party. She thought about the rent. She thought about the eggs and the jelly. She thought about the $1,100 a week that was, slowly, pulling her family back from the edge of a cliff. "I can survive this," she told herself. "I've survived worse." She didn't know that worse was still coming. She didn't know that in just a few weeks, Bianca Sterling would push her further than any employer ever had. In front of the entire household, in front of guests, in a single moment that would either break her completely or reveal something in her that even she didn't know she had. For now, she simply turned off the light, and in the darkness, she whispered the same thing she whispered every night since taking this job. One more day. Just one more day for Malik. Outside her window, the Sterling estate glittered under the Charleston moon, beautiful, cold, and full of secrets that hadn't surfaced yet. But they would. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm, a harsh one, but a rhythm nonetheless. Amara woke at 5, made the coffee at 192 degrees, ironed the pillowcases, and moved through the enormous house like a ghost who wasn't allowed to be seen or heard, only felt in the results of her labor. She discovered slowly that the other staff had their own quiet code of survival. James, the driver, never spoke unless directly asked a question. Delphine, who managed the gardens, wore headphones under her sun hat so she wouldn't have to hear Bianca's voice carrying across the lawn. Rosa, the cook, had worked for the family the longest, 6 years, and had developed something like armor, a flat, unreadable expression she wore from sunrise to sundown. "You get used to it," Rosa told Amara one night, as they sat on the back steps sharing a rare quiet moment. "Or you leave. Those are the only 2 options. What if you can't afford to leave?" Amara asked. Rosa didn't answer right away. She just looked out at the dark garden, at the fountain lit up in soft blue light, at the enormous house glowing like a lantern behind them. "Then you learn to leave inside your head," Rosa finally said. "Your body stays here. Your heart goes somewhere else. Somewhere she can't touch." Amara thought about that a lot in the days that followed. She thought about Malik, about the little drawings he mailed her every week. Crayon sons, crayon dogs, a crayon picture of the 2 of them holding hands under a rainbow, with the words, "I miss you, Mommy," scrawled across the top in his careful 7-year-old handwriting. She kept them taped to the wall above her bed, and every night, she looked at them before she closed her eyes. That was where her heart went. That was her somewhere else. But even that quiet mental escape had its limits, and Bianca seemed to sense exactly where those limits were, and press on them anyway. Started small. A comment about Amara's shoes being cheap-looking. A remark about her accent being very southern, very simple. Then it grew. Bianca began finding fault with everything. The way Amara arranged the flowers, the way she answered the door, the way she smiled at guests, which Bianca said made her look overly familiar, like she thinks she belongs in the conversation. One evening, during a dinner party for 12 of Charles Sterling's business associates, Bianca called Amara into the dining room to refill water glasses. Amara moved carefully, quietly, refilling each glass with practiced precision. She was reaching for the glass beside a guest named Mr. Halloway when her sleeve brushed against a small crystal salt shaker, knocking it onto the white tablecloth. The room went silent. Bianca set down her fork with exaggerated care. "Amara," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Do you know how much this tablecloth costs? Do you know how much anything in this house costs? Or does that concept simply not translate where you're from?" A few guests chuckled uncomfortably. Others looked down at their plates, embarrassed on Amara's behalf but too polite, or too cowardly to say anything. Amara felt heat rise in her face, felt her hands begin to shake as she reached for a napkin to blot the small spill. "I'm very sorry, Miss Bianca. I'll clean it up right away." "Clean it up?" Bianca repeated, almost laughing. "Yes. That's really the only thing you people are good for, isn't it?" The table went quiet again, this time with a different kind of silence. The silence of people realizing something had gone too far, even by Bianca's standards. Charles Sterling, seated at the head of the table, cleared his throat but said nothing. He rarely said anything when Bianca spoke to the staff. It was, Amara had come to understand, simply not something he involved himself in. Amara finished cleaning the spill in silence, her jaw tight, her eyes burning, but she did not cry. Not there. Not in front of them. She excused herself calmly, walked back to the kitchen, set down the tray, and gripped the edge of the counter with both hands, breathing slowly, counting to 10 the way her grandmother had taught her decades ago. Rosa found her like that a few minutes later. "She went too far tonight," Rosa said quietly. "She goes too far every night," Amara replied. "Tonight she just had an audience." Rosa hesitated, then said something Amara would remember for a long, long time. "You know what's strange? In 6 years, I've never once seen her cruel to someone who fought back. She only does this to people who stay quiet. I think she needs us to stay quiet. I think our silence is the only thing that makes her feel powerful." Amara turned that thought over in her mind for days afterward. Our silence is the only thing that makes her feel powerful. She didn't know it yet, but that single sentence would become the seed of everything that happened next. The moment that would arrive not long after, in front of the entire household, that would change not just Amara's fate, but Bianca Sterling's as well. Because sometimes, the people we try hardest to break are the ones who end up teaching us the truth about ourselves. And Bianca Sterling was about to learn a truth she never saw coming. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, exactly 11 weeks after Amara had started working at the estate. A day that began like any other and ended in a way nobody in that house would ever forget. Bianca had been under more pressure than usual. The wedding to Charles was 6 weeks away, and the stress of seating charts, caterers, and a mother-in-law who made no secret of disapproving of her had put Bianca on edge for days. She'd snapped at James for driving too slowly. She'd sent back 2 separate meals Rosa prepared, calling them inedible without explanation. The whole staff had learned to move through the house that week like people walking across thin ice. That afternoon, Amara was in the kitchen washing a large mixing bowl Rosa had used for cake batter, the kind of heavy stainless steel bowl that could hold a gallon of liquid. She was drying it when Bianca stormed in, phone in hand, face flushed with fury. "The florist cancelled," Bianca said to no one and everyone. 6 weeks before my wedding, and the florist cancelled. Nobody responded. Responding was dangerous. Bianca's eyes landed on Amara, standing near the sink with the steel bowl in her hands, half filled with rinse water. And something in Bianca, exhaustion, humiliation, cruelty, or all three tangled together, reached a breaking point. "You," Bianca said, stepping closer. "Did you touch my wedding folder? It was on the counter this morning and now it's not." "No, ma'am, I haven't seen it," Amara said calmly. "I can help you look for it if you'd like." "I don't want your help," Bianca snapped. "I want you to stop lying to me." "I'm not lying." And then it happened. Bianca reached out, grabbed the steel bowl from Amara's hands, the one still half filled with cold rinse water, and in one sharp, furious motion, threw the water directly into Amara's face. The kitchen went utterly silent. Water dripped from Amara's chin, soaking through the collar of her uniform. Rosa froze at the stove, a wooden spoon suspended mid-air. James, who had just walked in from the garage, stood in the doorway, stunned. "Maybe that'll cool you off," Bianca said, her voice trembling with something that wasn't quite triumph, something closer to panic, as if she herself couldn't quite believe what she'd just done. Maybe next time you'll remember your place. For a long moment, nobody in that kitchen moved. Water dripped steadily from Amara's hair onto the tile floor, a small rhythmic sound in the enormous silence. Everyone expected Amara to cry. Everyone expected her to apologize or flee the room, or beg for her job the way 3 housekeepers before her had done in similar moments of humiliation. She did none of those things. Amara reached up slowly and calmly, and wiped the water from her face with the back of her hand. She did not raise her voice. She did not lower her eyes. She looked directly at Bianca Sterling, and for the first time since Amara had arrived at that house, Bianca looked, just for a second, uncertain. "Miss Bianca," Amara said, her voice steady, quiet, but carrying through the entire kitchen. "I came to this house because I needed this job. Not because I needed to be treated like I don't matter. I have a son at home who believes his mother is the strongest woman in the world. I will not let you turn me into someone he wouldn't recognize." Bianca opened her mouth, but no words came. "You can fire me if you want," Amara continued. "That's your right. But you cannot make me small. Only I get to decide that. And I've decided I'm not small. I never was." The kitchen was so silent that the ticking of the wall clock seemed unbearably loud. Rosa had lowered the wooden spoon entirely, staring between the 2 women. James hadn't moved from the doorway. Bianca Sterling, 28 years old, engaged to a billionaire, mistress of a mansion, feared by every person who worked beneath her roof, stood frozen, dripping bowl still in her hand, unable to summon a single word. And then, without another sound, she set the bowl down on the counter, turned, and walked out of the kitchen. Amara stood there a moment longer, water still clinging to her collar, her hands trembling now that the confrontation was over, but her spine straight, her chin level, her eyes dry. "Are you all right?" Rosa finally whispered. Amara let out a slow breath. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I think something just changed." She didn't know how right she was. Because upstairs in her private study, Bianca Sterling sat down at her desk, put her face in her hands, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she cried. Not out of anger, but out of something far more complicated. Something that felt uncomfortably like recognition. Something that felt like shame. Nobody saw Bianca for the rest of that day. She didn't come down for dinner. She didn't summon anyone to her room. The household moved through the evening in a strange, uneasy quiet, everyone waiting for the storm they assumed was coming, the inevitable firing, the screaming, the consequences. They didn't come. The next morning, Amara arrived in the kitchen at 5:30 as always, half expecting a letter of termination waiting on the counter. Instead, she found Rosa already there, an odd expression on her face. "She wants to see you," Rosa said. "In the study. Alone." Amara's stomach tightened, but she nodded, smoothed her apron, and walked the long hallway toward Bianca's private study, the same walk 3 fired housekeepers had taken before her. She knocked once. "Come in," came Bianca's voice, quieter than Amara had ever heard it. Bianca was seated by the window, still in her robe, dark circles beneath her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept. On the desk in front of her sat an envelope. Amara's chest tightened, certain it contained her final check. "Sit down," Bianca said. Amara sat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, prepared for whatever came next. Bianca was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the garden below. "My mother worked as a housekeeper," she finally said. "Did you know that?" Amara blinked, caught completely off guard. "No, ma'am. I didn't. Nobody does. Charles doesn't even know the full truth. He thinks she was a hospitality consultant." Bianca let out a hollow laugh. "She cleaned houses in Charlotte for 22 years. Big houses like this one. I used to go with her sometimes when I was small, and I'd watch the way people talked to her. The way they looked right through her like she was furniture. Like she wasn't a whole person with a whole life. Just a pair of hands that made their world comfortable. Bianca finally turned to face Amara, and her eyes were red-rimmed, raw. I swore I would never end up like her. I swore I would never be looked at that way again. And somewhere along the way, her voice cracked. Somewhere along the way, I became the person who looked at others that way instead. I became exactly what I hated. And I didn't even see it happening until yesterday, when you looked at me and said I couldn't make you small. She pushed the envelope across the desk. Amara stared at it, unsure what to expect. Open it, Bianca said. Inside was not a termination letter. It was a check, far larger than a week's pay, and a short handwritten note. For your son's education. I'm sorry it took me this long to see you. B. Amara looked up, stunned into silence. I'm not doing this because I feel guilty, though I do, Bianca said. I'm doing it because yesterday you did something nobody in this house has done in years. You told me the truth about myself, even though it could have cost you everything. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done in my entire life. Amara's throat tightened. I wasn't trying to teach you a lesson, Miss Bianca. I was just trying to hold on to myself. I know, Bianca said softly. That's exactly why it worked. Over the following days, something in the house began slowly to shift. Bianca didn't transform overnight. Old habits, old wounds, don't dissolve in a single conversation. But she began saying please to the staff. She began asking Rosa's opinion on menus instead of dictating them. She began, haltingly and awkwardly, learning names. Real names, first names, the names of people's children. And she began spending time with Amara specifically, not as employer and employee, but as something closer to two women who had both, in their own ways, learned to survive rooms that didn't want them to take up space. It was during one of these quiet conversations weeks later that Bianca made a decision that would change the trajectory of Amara's entire life, one neither of them saw coming on that terrible water-soaked Tuesday in October. The decision came on a rainy afternoon in November, 6 weeks after the incident in the kitchen. Amara was in the laundry room, folding linens, when Bianca appeared in the doorway. Something she never used to do, seek Amara out in the working parts of the house rather than summoning her upstairs. Can I ask you something? Bianca said. Amara set down the sheet she was folding. Of course. What did you do before this? Before housekeeping, I mean. Amara hesitated, unused to being asked about her life, rather than simply expected to disappear into her work. I was a paralegal, she said finally. For 6 years, at a firm in Colombia. I was studying part-time to become a full attorney. I'd finished almost 2 years of law school at night. Bianca's eyebrows lifted, surprised. What happened? My marriage happened, Amara said, a small wry smile crossing her face. My ex-husband didn't want a wife who was too ambitious. Then the divorce happened and the bills happened, and somewhere in there, law school became a thing I used to do instead of a thing I was doing. I told myself I'd go back. I still tell myself that some nights. Bianca was quiet for a long moment, processing this. You're one of the most composed, articulate people I've ever met, and you're scrubbing my kitchen floors. I'm scrubbing your kitchen floors because it pays for my son's shoes, Amara said simply. There's no shame in that. But you're right that it's not the whole story of who I am. Bianca nodded slowly, something shifting behind her eyes, the early shape of an idea. 3 days later, Bianca called Amara into the study again. This time there was no envelope on the desk. Instead, there was a laptop, open to a web page Amara didn't immediately recognize. Charles's law firm, Sterling & Vance, has a paralegal to JD sponsorship program, Bianca said. It's for employees at the firm who want to finish law school while working. Full tuition, flexible hours, mentorship from senior partners. I called this morning and asked if it could be extended to an outside candidate. Charles made a call. They said yes. Amara stared at the screen, then at Bianca, unable to fully process what she was hearing. Miss Bianca, You'd start as a paralegal in their family law division, Bianca continued, talking quickly now, as if she needed to get it all out before she lost her nerve. The salary is nearly triple what you're making here, and it comes with full benefits, health insurance for you and Malik. And in 18 months, if you keep your grades up, you finish your JD. Tears welled in Amara's eyes, and this time she didn't try to stop them. Why would you do this? Bianca looked down at her hands. Because 6 weeks ago you looked at me, after I did something unforgivable, and instead of breaking, you told me the truth about who I'd become. Nobody has ever cared enough about me to do that. Everyone else just tolerates me or fears me or flatters me. You were the only person brave enough to actually see me and say something real. She looked up, her eyes glassy. I can't undo what I did to you, or to the housekeepers before you. But I can make sure that the next chapter of your life looks nothing like the last few months. You deserve a life that matches who you actually are, Amara. Not who this house made you pretend to be. Amara sat in stunned silence for a long moment, thinking of Malik, of the crayon drawings taped above her bed, of law school textbooks she'd boxed up 2 years ago and never had the heart to sell. I don't know what to say, she finally whispered. Say yes, Bianca said, a small, hopeful smile breaking through for the first time in weeks. That's all you have to say. Amara looked at the laptop screen, at the offer that would change not just her life, but her son's entire future. And then she looked at Bianca, at the young woman who had thrown water in her face 2 months ago and was now offering her a door back into the life she'd once dreamed of. Yes, Amara said, her voice breaking. Yes, thank you. Neither of them could have known, in that quiet study with rain tapping softly against the windows, that this single decision was only the beginning of a transformation that would ripple through both their lives, and through the lives of every person who worked in that house. For years to come, Amara gave her notice at the Sterling estate 2 weeks later, though notice wasn't quite the right word. Bianca had insisted on a gentle transition, weeks of overlap, and a proper goodbye rather than the cold, transactional exits most housekeepers received. On Amara's last day, something happened that nobody expected, least of all Amara herself. Bianca called a staff meeting in the kitchen, the same kitchen where the water had been thrown months earlier. Every member of the household staff gathered. Rosa, James, Delphine, 2 housemaids Amara had grown close to, even the head of security, who rarely came inside. Bianca stood at the head of the room, visibly nervous, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I owe every one of you an apology, she began, her voice unsteady but clear. Not just Amara. All of you. I've spent the last 3 years treating this house like a stage where I was the only person whose feelings mattered. I made you feel small so I could feel big. That's not leadership. That's not even ownership. That's just cruelty dressed up in expensive clothes. The room was utterly silent, staff members exchanging uncertain glances, unsure if this was some kind of trap. Starting today, things are going to be different, Bianca continued. Everyone's salary is increasing by 20%, effective immediately. Full health benefits for everyone on staff and their families. And I'm establishing an education fund, modeled after what Charles's firm did for Amara, for anyone on this staff or their children who wants to pursue further education. Whether that's a GED, a trade certification, or a law degree. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. James stood frozen, blinking rapidly. Delphine, who had worn headphones under her sun hat for 2 years just to survive this job, began quietly crying. I can't undo the last 3 years, Bianca said, her voice cracking. But I can make sure the next chapter looks completely different. And I have one person to thank for showing me that. She turned to Amara. You didn't owe me grace. After what I did to you, you didn't owe me a single kind word. But you gave it to me anyway, and it changed everything. So, thank you. The room erupted into something Amara never expected to witness in that house. Applause. Not the polite, obligatory kind, but genuine, overwhelmed applause, staff members hugging each other, some laughing through tears. Amara stood at the center of it, overwhelmed, thinking of her grandmother's old saying, the one she'd repeated to herself 100 times over the past few months. You can't control how people treat you. You can only control who you stay, no matter how they treat you. She had stayed herself. And somehow, impossibly, that had been enough to change an entire household. As the meeting ended and staff members dispersed back to their duties, lighter somehow, straighter in the shoulders, Rosa approached Amara, wiping her eyes with the corner of her apron. 6 years, Rosa said. 6 years I worked in this house, and I never thought I'd see a day like today. Neither did I, Amara admitted. You know what I think, Rosa said, taking Amara's hands in hers. I think some people come into our lives just to test how much cruelty we can survive. And other people come into our lives to test how much grace we're willing to give, even to people who don't deserve it yet. I think you were the second kind for all of us. I think you saved this house, Amara. Not just yourself. Amara didn't know what to say to that, so she simply pulled Rosa into a hug. The two women standing together in the kitchen that had once been the site of Amara's worst humiliation and was now, somehow, the site of something like healing. That evening, as Amara packed her small room above the garage for the last time, taking down Malik's crayon drawings one by one and carefully placing them in a folder, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope, wide and warm and entirely her own. Tomorrow a new chapter would begin. But tonight, she allowed herself simply to feel the weight of what had happened. How one moment of quiet courage in a water-soaked kitchen had rippled outward into something neither she nor Bianca could have imagined. The paralegal to JD program at Sterling and Vance was, in Amara's own words, the hardest and most rewarding thing I've ever survived. She started as a family law paralegal, working alongside attorneys twice her age with half her instinct for empathy. And within her first month, senior partner Diana Chaby pulled her aside. You have something most lawyers spend a decade trying to learn, Diane told her. You know how to make people feel heard before you ever open a law book. Don't let anyone train that out of you. Amara enrolled in night classes that spring, finishing the 2 years of law school she'd abandoned during her marriage. It wasn't easy. She worked full days at the firm, picked Malik up from school, helped with homework, cooked dinner, and then opened her textbooks at 9 p.m., often studying until 1 or 2 in the morning. There were nights she cried from exhaustion. There were mornings she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake, appending a stable if difficult life for an uncertain, grueling one. But every time doubt crept in, she thought of that moment in the Sterling kitchen, the moment she'd looked at Bianca and refused to let herself become small. If she could survive that, she told herself she could survive organic chemistry-level case law and 4 hours of sleep a night. Malik, now 8, became her biggest cheerleader. He taped his own drawings above her new desk, no longer crayon suns and rainbows, but increasingly sophisticated pictures of his mother in a graduation cap, holding what he called a lawyer briefcase, standing beside a house with the words "Our New Home" scrawled above it in green marker. Are we really going to have a house, Mommy? He asked her one night, climbing into her lap while she reviewed contract law notes. We're going to work for it, Amara told him, kissing the top of his head. Together. One day at a time. Meanwhile, at the Sterling estate, Bianca's transformation continued in ways that surprised even the staff who'd watched it unfold from the beginning. She began volunteering, quietly without publicity, at a shelter for domestic abuse survivors in downtown Charleston, an initiative she never spoke of publicly, one she funded almost entirely out of her own pocket. When a local reporter, tipped off by a shelter employee, tried to write a story about the secret charity of Charleston's Society Bride, Bianca declined every interview request. This isn't about my image, she told Charles when he suggested she reconsider. Allow a little positive press. I'm not doing this to look good. I'm doing this because I finally understand what it means to be given a second chance, and I want other women to have one too. Charles, for his part, watched his fiancée's transformation with a mixture of confusion and quiet admiration. He'd married into wealth expecting a certain kind of partner, polished, image-conscious, focused on the optics of their combined empire. Instead, he found himself falling in love, for the first time in their relationship, with someone who seemed genuinely, urgently interested in becoming a better person. "What changed you?" he asked her one night, several months after the water incident, as they sat together on the terrace overlooking the garden. Bianca was quiet for a long moment before answering. "A woman I threw water on," she finally said. "A woman who had every reason to hate me and instead just told me the truth. Nobody had ever done that before. Everyone around me my whole life either flattered me or feared me. She did neither. She just saw me exactly as I was, and refused to let me pretend otherwise." Charles reached over and took her hand. "I think that woman gave you something more valuable than she'll ever know." "I think so too," Bianca said softly. "Which is why I need to find a way to keep giving it back." Neither of them yet knew just how far that giving back would eventually reach, or how it would, in less than 2 years, bring Amara Whitfield back into their lives in a way none of them could have predicted. 18 months passed. 18 months of exhaustion, small victories, sleepless nights, and slow, steady progress. Amara finished her final semester of law school in the spring, graduating with honors, an achievement that felt almost surreal after everything it had taken to get there. Malik sat in the front row of her graduation ceremony, wearing his best clothes, holding a hand-drawn sign that read, "That's my mum," in bright, uneven letters, and Amara had never in her life felt prouder standing anywhere. She passed the bar exam on her first attempt, something Diana Chaby told her almost never happened for candidates juggling full-time work and single parenthood, and was offered a full position as an associate attorney at Sterling & Vance, in the family law division she'd once served as a paralegal. It was there, 6 months into her new role, that Amara took on a case that would test everything she'd learned, everything she believed about the law and about second chances. A case involving a domestic worker, a wealthy family, and allegations of unpaid wages and workplace mistreatment eerily similar to what Amara herself had once endured. The client was a woman named Carla Jimenez, a housekeeper who'd worked for a prominent Charleston family for 4 years, only to be fired without notice or severance after raising concerns about unsafe working conditions. Carla had no savings, no support system, and a teenage daughter depending on her. Amara took the case pro bono, staying late every night for weeks, building a case with the same quiet determination that had carried her through law school. She thought often, during those long nights, of Rosa's words back in the Sterling kitchen. "I think some people come into our lives just to test how much cruelty we can survive." She thought of every housekeeper who'd been fired before her, everyone who hadn't had someone like Bianca step in to change their fate. Not everyone gets a Bianca, she thought. But maybe they can get a lawyer who understands exactly what they're going through. The case settled favorably for Carla. Full back pay, a public apology, and a settlement that allowed her daughter to attend college debt-free. It was Amara's first major win as an attorney, but more than that, it became the seed of something larger. She began quietly building a small pro bono practice within the firm, specifically for domestic workers facing wage theft, unsafe conditions, or wrongful termination, women who, like her, had once felt powerless in houses that treated them as invisible. It was during a fundraising gala for this initiative, held coincidentally at a downtown Charleston hotel, that Amara ran into Bianca Sterling again for the first time in over a year. Bianca was there as a donor, having quietly funded a portion of the very initiative Amara had built. When their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, both women froze for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened between them passing silently in that single glance. "Amara Whitfield," Bianca said, approaching with something between a smile and disbelief. "Attorney Amara Whitfield. Look at you." "Bianca," Amara said, and found herself smiling too, genuinely warmly. "I heard you'd been funding this program. I had no idea it was you specifically." "I try not to make a show of it," Bianca said. But when I heard the name of the attorney who started it, she shook her head, eyes glistening. I should have known it was you. Of course it was you. The two women talked for nearly an hour that evening, catching up on everything. Malik, now 10, thriving in school. Bianca and Charles's marriage, now 2 years strong. The shelter Bianca still quietly funded. The practice Amara had built from nothing but determination and a single terrible afternoon in a Charleston kitchen. I think about that day a lot, Bianca admitted quietly, near the end of the evening. The water. I think about how easily that could have been the day I destroyed someone's spirit completely. Instead, somehow, it became the day everything changed, for both of us. Amara nodded slowly. I used to think that was the worst day of my life, she said. Now I think it might have been the most important one. Word of Amara's pro bono initiative began to spread beyond Charleston, first through local news coverage, then through a feature story in a regional magazine, and eventually through a national outlet that ran a piece titled, "The Lawyer Who Fights for the Women Who Used to Clean Houses Like Hers." The story didn't shy away from Amara's own history. Her time as a housekeeper, the incident with the water, her decision to build something meaningful out of one of the most painful experiences of her life. Readers across the country responded, moved by a story that felt, as one commenter wrote, like proof that dignity isn't something anyone can take from you, no matter how hard they try. Amara received hundreds of messages in the weeks that followed. From domestic workers sharing their own stories of mistreatment, from lawyers offering to volunteer with her initiative, from mothers who said her story had given them the courage to leave difficult jobs, difficult marriages, difficult situations they'd once believed they had to simply endure. But one message, arriving quietly through her firm's contact page, meant more to Amara than almost any other. It was from Bianca. I know you don't need my praise. And I know I'm the last person who has any right to be proud of you. But I am. I think about that Tuesday almost every day. Not with shame anymore, but with gratitude, because it taught me the most important lesson of my life. That the people we dismiss as small are often carrying more strength than we could ever imagine. Thank you for teaching me that, even though you owed me nothing, Malik is lucky to have you. And honestly, so am I. Amara read the message 3 times, then closed her laptop and sat quietly for a long moment, thinking about how strange and unpredictable life could be. How a single act of cruelty, met with a single act of quiet courage, could ripple outward into scholarships, career changes, an entire non-profit initiative, and dozens of women given a second chance they might never have received otherwise. That winter, Amara's initiative officially became a registered non-profit, the Whitfield Dignity Project, named not for pride, but because Malik had suggested it. Because that's what you always tell me, Mommy, he'd said. That nobody can take my dignity unless I let them. The organization now employs 3 full-time attorneys and has helped over 200 domestic workers across South Carolina recover unpaid wages, escape unsafe working conditions, and, in several cases, pursue their own further education. Bianca sits on the organization's board, not as a figurehead, but as an active member who personally interviews and mentors young women coming out of situations similar to the one Amara once endured. At the organization's 2nd annual gala, Bianca stood at the podium to introduce the keynote speaker, a moment that, 18 months earlier, neither woman could have possibly imagined. 3 years ago, Bianca told the crowded ballroom, I threw a bowl of water in this woman's face because I was too broken to recognize what real strength looked like. She stood there, soaked, humiliated in front of a room full of strangers, and instead of breaking, she looked me in the eye and told me the truth about who I'd become. That single moment of courage didn't just change my life. It changed hers too. And now, because of the work she's built, it's changing hundreds of others. The room rose in applause as Amara walked to the podium, and for a moment, the two women simply looked at each other. The woman who had once been dismissed as invisible, and the woman who had once believed cruelty was the only language of power, both transformed in their own ways, by a single afternoon neither of them would ever forget. 5 years after that Tuesday afternoon in the Sterling kitchen, Amara Whitfield stood in front of a different kind of audience. a graduating class of paralegals and pre-law students at a community college scholarship program, one of 11 scholarship initiatives now funded annually by the Whitfield Dignity Project. Malik, now 13, sat in the front row, taller now, more composed, but still watching his mother with the same wide-eyed pride he'd shown at her law school graduation years earlier. Beside him sat Bianca, who had, over the years, become something between a mentor and a friend to both Amara and her son, a relationship that still occasionally struck both women as improbable, given how it began. "I want to tell you about the worst day of my life," Amara began, addressing the graduates. "It happened in a kitchen, and it involved a bowl of ice-cold water, and a woman who believed that treating me cruelly was the only way to feel powerful in her own life." A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure where the story was headed. "For a long time, I thought that day defined the worst of what people could do to each other," Amara continued. "But I've come to understand something different. That day didn't define cruelty. It defined a choice. My choice in the moment right after, to decide whether I would let someone else's brokenness convince me that I was small too." She paused, scanning the room, letting the words settle. "Here's what I want every one of you to understand as you go out into your careers, into rooms where people might try to make you feel invisible. Your worth was never something anyone else had the power to give you or take away. It was always yours. Every single day someone makes you feel small, you have a choice, the same choice I had in that kitchen. You can believe what they say about you, or you can hold on to the truth of who you actually are, and let that truth do the talking instead." She looked toward the back of the room, where Bianca stood, eyes glistening, hands clasped in front of her. "The woman who threw that water at me is here today, sitting beside my son. She spent the last 5 years proving that people aren't fixed, that cruelty isn't a life sentence, and neither is being its target. She taught me that even the people who hurt us most can become the people who help us heal, if they're brave enough to face what they've done and change it. That kind of transformation isn't common, but it's possible. And when it happens, it can ripple out in ways neither person could have ever imagined." The room was silent, moved, several graduates wiping their eyes. "So my moral for you today isn't about the moment someone hurts you," Amara said, her voice steady, warm, full of the same quiet strength that had carried her through that terrible Tuesday 5 years ago. "It's about the moment after. The moment you decide who you're going to be, regardless of what was just done to you. That moment, that choice, is where your whole life actually gets written." After the ceremony, as families mingled and graduates posed for photos with their scholarship certificates, Bianca approached Amara, Malik trailing behind her, holding a bouquet of flowers he'd insisted on buying for his mother that morning. "You know," Bianca said, watching the room full of young people whose lives had been changed by an organization built from one terrible afternoon, "I used to think legacy meant buildings with your name on them, or headlines, or the kind of wealth Charles's family has spent generations accumulating." "And now?" Amara asked. Bianca smiled, watching Malik hand his mother the flowers, watching the young graduates laughing and hugging their families nearby. "Now I think legacy is simpler than that," she said. "I think it's just this, one person deciding not to let cruelty win, and that decision changing everything that comes after it. That's the only kind of legacy that actually matters." Amara took her son's hand, looked around at the room full of futures that had been quietly, permanently altered by a single moment of courage in a Charleston kitchen years earlier, and felt something settle deep in her chest. Something like peace, something like gratitude, something like coming full circle in a way she never could have predicted on that cold October afternoon. The moral of this story isn't complicated, but it's one worth remembering. Cruelty doesn't get the final word. Dignity does. Quiet, steady, unshakable dignity, held onto even in the moments when it would be easier to let it go. And sometimes the people who hurt us most become, in time, the people who help us build something none of us could have built alone. If this story moved you tonight, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more stories just like this one, and share it with someone in your life who needs to hear that their dignity was never anyone else's to take. Thank you for staying until the end. I'll see you in the next story.